May 23, 1979. A 28-year-old rock singer walks into a Los Angeles bankruptcy court and does something almost unheard of in the music industry. Tom Petty, who has 2 gold albums behind him and a growing fan base, declares himself financially ruined. He lists debts of over $500,000 against assets of just $56,000. The move stuns the music industry. Here's an artist on the verge of breakthrough success, voluntarily admitting he's broke. But this isn't desperation. This is warfare. Behind this declaration lies one of the most calculated gambits in rock history, a fight that would reshape how artists negotiate with record labels and produce an album that would define American rock for a generation. The album that emerges from this chaos will be called Damn the Torpedoes, taking its title from a Civil War admiral's battle cry. And like that famous command, Petty is about to charge forward, consequences be damned. To understand how Tom Petty ended up in bankruptcy court, you have to go back 3 years. To a young band from Gainesville, Florida, desperate to make it in the music business. In 1976, Petty and his band The Heartbreakers signed with Shelter Records, a boutique label run by producer Denny Cordell and musician Leon Russell. The deal seemed like a golden ticket, except for one crushing detail buried in the contract. Petty had signed away his publishing rights for just $10,000. Every song he wrote, every melody that came from his guitar, the rights belonged to someone else. It's the kind of deal young artists make when they don't know better, when the dream of making music blinds them to the business realities. As Petty would later reflect, he had no idea what giving away publishing meant. He was a musician, not a lawyer. The first 2 albums did well critically. Breakdown and American Girl became underground hits, particularly in England where the Heartbreakers found their first real audience. But despite growing success, Petty saw little money. The advance was recoupable, the royalty rate was slim, and without his publishing income, he was essentially working for free. He could tour until he dropped, write hit after hit, and the people who owned his contract would see $10 for every one that reached his pocket. Then, in March 1979, everything changed. ABC Records, which distributed Shelter, was sold to MCA Records, one of the industry's giants, and in that sale, Tom Petty's contract was transferred like property, without his permission, without his consultation. One day he worked for a small independent label he'd chosen. The next day, he belonged to a corporation he'd never agreed to join. Petty refused to accept it. His contract with ABC included a clause stating they couldn't sell his contract without consent. But MCA saw things differently. As far as they were concerned, they'd bought ABC's assets, and Petty was one of those assets. In April, both MCA and Shelter filed lawsuits against Petty for breach of contract. Most artists would have folded. The legal fees alone could bankrupt someone. Fighting a corporation with deep pockets and armies of lawyers, that was a battle you weren't supposed to win. But Tom Petty had grown up poor in Florida, had spent years grinding it out in bars and small clubs. He knew how to fight. So he did something radical. He decided to fund his 3rd album entirely himself, without label support, racking up studio costs deliberately. Then he withheld the finished album, refusing to deliver it to either label. The bill climbed past $500,000, money he didn't have. And when the labels sued harder, demanding he fulfill his contract, Petty declared bankruptcy. If the court ruled his contract void, he'd be free. If not, well, he'd already decided he wouldn't back down. In his own words, he refused to be bought and sold like a piece of meat. While lawyers argued in Century City, Petty faced another crucial decision. Who would produce this album he was betting everything on? His previous producer, Denny Cordell, had helmed the first 2 Heartbreakers records with solid results. But Cordell made a surprising suggestion. Hire a young engineer named Jimmy Iovine. At the time, Iovine was barely known as a producer. He'd made his name engineering John Lennon's Mind Games and working on Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run. But Petty trusted Cordell's instinct. When Iovine flew down to hear what the band was working on, he became immediately excited by two songs in particular, early demos of Refugee and Here Comes My Girl, both with music written by guitarist Mike Campbell. Iovine heard hits, but more importantly, he heard potential, a band that could be great if pushed hard enough. He told Petty he wanted to hear everything, every unreleased song, every old demo, going back to Petty's previous band, Mudcrutch. This meant combing through years of cassettes and rough recordings. Most producers wouldn't bother. Iovine insisted. That deep dive unearthed Don't Do Me Like That, a song Petty had demoed as far back as 1974 and considered a throwaway. Iovine heard what would become the band's first top 10 single. From the beginning, he and Petty shared a vision. This album needed to be massive, not just good, massive, career-defining. Because if it wasn't, all of Petty's legal battles would be for nothing. Iovine brought something else the Heartbreakers needed: perfectionism bordering on obsession. The band were great live players, scrappy and energetic, but in the studio they lacked the polish that could make songs jump out of radios. Iovine aimed to change that, even if it meant conflict. Recording began in late 1978 at Sound City Studios in Van Nuys, California, with additional work at Cherokee Studios in Hollywood. Sound City was already legendary for its drum sound, that massive, clear punch that defined 70s rock. Iovine intended to use every bit of that reputation. From day one, drummer Stan Lynch felt the pressure. Iovine wanted the drums perfect, not just tight, but enormous. He spent what felt like weeks just getting the snare sound right on Refugee. Different drums were tried, different tunings, different rooms. Lynch would play take after take while Iovine and engineer Shelly Yakus fiddled with microphone placements. The band grew frustrated. They were used to playing live, capturing energy in a few takes. This was different. This was architecture, building a sound brick by brick. Campbell later estimated they spent 2 weeks just on the snare drum for Refugee. Lynch thought Iovine was crazy. But when they finally nailed it, when that snare cracked at the beginning of Refugee with perfect, sharp authority, everyone in the studio knew. Even the receptionist came running to hear the playback. That moment justified everything. Refugee almost didn't exist. The music came from Mike Campbell, who'd been fooling around on his 4-track home recorder, inspired by listening to John Mayall's version of Oh Pretty Woman, featuring a young Mick Taylor on guitar. Campbell captured a moody minor key progression in F-sharp minor, built around a simple but powerful chord sequence. He gave the cassette to Petty without much fanfare, just another demo among dozens. But Petty connected with it immediately. In about 10 minutes, he wrote the lyrics, words that spoke to his current battle but resonated far beyond it. You Don't Have to Live Like a Refugee wasn't just about a romantic relationship. It was about anyone feeling trapped, pushed around, fighting for freedom. It was autobiographical without being literal. The song came together during the most stressful period of Petty's life. Between recording sessions, he spent his days in lawyers' offices in Century City, dealing with depositions and motions and legal strategy. He even wrote a song about it called Century City that made the album. That experience, feeling cornered, fighting for survival, bled into everything he was writing. Refugee became the album's centerpiece, a declaration that matched the album's title. Petty's vocals rode the high end of his range, giving the song a strained, desperate quality that perfectly matched the lyrics. The production was stripped down. Campbell's skeletal guitar riff, Benmont Tench's sweeping organ, Ron Blair's bass, Lynch's now perfect drums. Nothing extra, just power and clarity. Iovine drove them through over 100 takes, refusing to splice together multiple performances. He wanted one complete, perfect take with all the energy intact. The band thought he was torturing them. But again, when they heard the final version, everyone understood. The song didn't just sound good, it exploded. When Refugee was released as a single, it climbed to number 15 on the Billboard Hot 100. More importantly, it became inescapable on rock radio. That opening guitar riff, that defiant chorus, it was everything Petty had been fighting for, captured in 3.5 minutes. The legal battle intensified as recording continued. MCA demanded the master tapes. Petty had to get creative. He instructed his roadies to take the tapes out of the studio every night and hide them, but he told them not to tell him where. That way, when lawyers asked under oath if he knew where the tapes were, he could honestly say no. He wasn't lying. He literally didn't know. The strategy was brilliant but stressful. Every day felt precarious. The sessions themselves became a refuge. The one place where Petty had control. In the studio, it wasn't about contracts or lawyers. It was about music. But money was running out. The album was taking longer than expected thanks to Iovine's perfectionism, and every extra day meant more studio fees Petty couldn't afford. To make ends meet and keep his legal case in the public eye, the Heartbreakers booked a tour in the middle of recording. They called it the Lawsuit Tour, and even printed t-shirts asking YMCA. It was an audacious move, using his fight with the label as marketing. Fans loved it. They saw Petty as an underdog fighting the system, a working-class hero standing up to corporate power. In interviews, Petty was candid about the battle. He told reporters he felt like a zombie before the tour, trapped in courtrooms instead of on stage where he belonged. One infamous meeting with MCA executives entered rock folklore. Petty walked in cleaning his fingernails with a switchblade while the label's lawyers read their statements. The message was clear. He wasn't intimidated. They could sue all they wanted. He would rather go broke than give in. The bankruptcy strategy was designed to scare the industry. If Petty succeeded in voiding his contract through bankruptcy court, other artists might try the same thing. Record labels relied on binding contracts to control their artists. If bankruptcy became a tool for breaking those contracts, the whole system could collapse. MCA's lawyers argued Petty was gaming the system, using bankruptcy as a weapon rather than a genuine financial crisis. They had a point. Petty had deliberately run up costs. But Petty's team argued the contracts themselves were exploitative, signed under duress by a young artist who didn't understand what he was giving away. Finally, MCA blinked. They'd realized Petty would actually do it. He'd destroy his career rather than submit. The label offered a settlement, a new imprint called Backstreet Records, distributed by MCA but giving Petty more control. More importantly, he got his publishing rights back. The deal reportedly included a $3 million guarantee. Petty had won. The album could be released. All those months of stress, all that money spent, all those perfect drum takes, they were about to pay off. Damn the Torpedoes was released on October 19, 1979, one day before Petty's 29th birthday. From the moment Refugee kicked in, listeners heard something different, a crystalline, powerful sound that seemed to burst from speakers with unusual clarity and force. This was Jimmy Iovine's gift. He'd taken the Heartbreakers' raw energy and given it a sonic sheen that worked on both FM radio and in arenas. The drums hit hard without being muddy. The guitars had bite without shrillness. Petty's voice, nasally and high but full of character, sat perfectly in the mix. Every element had space to breathe while still feeling cohesive. Critics immediately recognized the leap forward. Rolling Stone raved it was the album everyone had been waiting for, assuming they were all Tom Petty fans, which, the reviewer suggested, they would be if there were any justice in the world. The Village Voice noted this was the first time the Heartbreakers were rocking as powerfully as Petty was writing. But the real test was commercial. The album entered the Billboard 200 and climbed rapidly. Within weeks, it hit number 2, where it stayed for 7 consecutive weeks. Only one album blocked its path to number one, Pink Floyd's The Wall. Petty later joked he loved Pink Floyd but hated them that year. Don't Do Me Like That became the band's first top 10 single, peaking at number 10. Refugee hit 15. Here Comes My Girl became a rock radio staple even though it wasn't a massive chart hit. These songs didn't just succeed, they endured. Decades later, they remain cornerstone tracks of classic rock radio. The album's success was massive and immediate. It went gold and platinum in the same week in 1980. By 1984, it achieved double platinum status. In 2015, it was certified triple platinum, over 3 million copies sold in the United States alone. For an artist who'd been broke a year earlier, it was vindication on a scale few achieve. Beyond the numbers, Damn the Torpedoes established Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers as a major force in American rock. They weren't just another band with a hit song. They were arena-filling stars with a distinctive sound and identity. The album bridged the gap between the 1970s and 1980s, carrying forward the straightforward rock values of bands like the Byrds and the Rolling Stones while sounding completely contemporary. Every track on Damn the Torpedoes serves a purpose, creating a focused 36-minute statement without filler. Here Comes My Girl opens with a slow, contemplative verse before exploding into one of rock's most euphoric choruses. The song captures that moment when everything feels possible, when the right person walks into the room and the world transforms. Mike Campbell's music provides the bones. Petty's lyrics provide the soul. Even The Losers takes a different approach, acknowledging defeat and disappointment while finding dignity in survival. It's not a winner's anthem, it's a fighter's anthem, recognizing that most dreams don't come true, but you keep going anyway. The song resonated with Petty's core audience, working-class kids who understood life doesn't always work out, but you don't quit. Don't Do Me Like That feels almost celebratory despite its lyrics about betrayal. Benmont Tench's organ work sparkles, giving the song a brightness that contrasts with its subject matter. This balance, darkness wrapped in accessibility, would become a Petty signature. Century City directly addresses the legal battles, name-checking the Los Angeles neighborhood where lawyers clustered. It's the album's most specific track, capturing Petty's frustration with the business side of music. While it didn't become a hit, it shows Petty's willingness to mine his own experiences for material. Louisiana Rain closes the album with a slower, more contemplative mood. After all the urgency and defiance, it provides breathing room, a moment to reflect. The rain metaphor works both as romantic imagery and as cleansing, washing away the past, preparing for whatever comes next. Winning the battle with MCA proved to be just the beginning. In 1981, Petty and the label clashed again over album pricing. MCA wanted to sell the next Heartbreakers record, Hard Promises, for $9.98 instead of the standard $8.98. It doesn't sound like much now, but in 1981, it represented a significant price increase that Petty believed exploited fans. He threatened to withhold the album or rename it $8.98. He told reporters that if the industry didn't take a stand, records would cost $20 someday. A prediction that proved remarkably accurate. MCA backed down again, selling Hard Promises at the standard price. These confrontations established Petty's reputation as an artist who fought for principles beyond his own interests. He wasn't just protecting his royalties. He was protecting fans from price gouging, protecting his creative control, pushing back against an industry that treated artists as commodities. The music industry took notice. Other artists saw that standing up to labels was possible. You could win if you were willing to fight. Petty's bankruptcy strategy became famous, influencing how musicians approached negotiations. Labels became more cautious about pushing artists too far. But there were costs. The stress of those years took a toll. Relationships within the band became strained at times. The pressure to match Damn the Torpedoes with subsequent albums created expectations that were difficult to meet. Success brought new complications even as it solved old problems. Still, Petty never regretted the fight. He'd stood up for himself and won. He'd made the album he wanted to make, and he'd proven that artists didn't have to accept whatever deals labels offered. There was power in saying no, in being willing to walk away, in refusing to be treated like property. Damn the Torpedoes arrived at a perfect moment in rock history. Punk had shaken up the music world but hadn't conquered the mainstream. Disco was fading. New wave was emerging but hadn't yet defined itself. In that gap, Petty offered something both traditional and fresh. Rock and roll with roots in the 1960s, but a sound that belonged firmly to its time. The album influenced a generation of heartland rockers who followed. Artists like John Mellencamp, Bruce Springsteen in his more commercial mode, and later bands like the Wallflowers owed something to the template Petty established. Accessible but authentic, catchy but substantive, American but not jingoistic. Jimmy Iovine's production became a model for how to make rock records sound good on radio without sacrificing edge. He went on to co-found Interscope Records and became one of the music industry's most powerful figures. His work with U2, Stevie Nicks, and countless others showed traces of techniques he'd pioneered on Damn the Torpedoes. The album's standing in rock history solidified over time. In 2003, Rolling Stone ranked it number 313 on their list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. In their 2020 revision, they moved it up to number 231, recognition that its influence had only grown. It wasn't a revolutionary album in the way that changed music's direction, but it was a perfected form, showing what classic rock could still achieve. Years later, band members reflected on the album with mixed emotions. They were proud of what they'd achieved, but honest about the difficulty. Stan Lynch spoke about the frustration of Iovine's perfectionism, the endless takes that felt unnecessary until they heard the results. Mike Campbell noted they didn't have studio chops yet, that they kept thinking they'd nailed it only to be told to do it again. The tension wasn't all negative. It pushed them to a higher level, but it set a standard that was hard to maintain. Every subsequent album was judged against Damn the Torpedoes. Did it match the clarity, the energy, the perfection? Usually not quite, because that kind of lightning rarely strikes twice. Petty himself saw the album as a turning point, but not the end of the story. He continued evolving as a songwriter, exploring different sounds and themes. He released solo albums, formed the Traveling Wilbury supergroup with George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, and Jeff Lynne. He never stood still, never tried to endlessly recreate his breakthrough. But Damn the Torpedoes remained special. The album that proved he'd been right to fight, right to refuse compromise, right to believe his music was worth the battle. It wasn't just about commercial success or critical acclaim. It was about dignity, about maintaining control over your own work, about not letting others decide what you were worth. The title Damn the Torpedoes comes from Admiral David Farragut's command during the Battle of Mobile Bay in 1864. His ships faced a minefield, and when warned about torpedoes in the water, Farragut supposedly shouted, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." It's a story about refusing to be stopped by danger, about pressing forward despite obstacles. Tom Petty chose that title deliberately. It captured everything about making the album, the legal battles, the financial risk, the artistic pressure, every reason to stop, every warning about the dangers ahead. He ignored them all and pushed forward. The album's legacy extends beyond music. It's a case study in artist rights, showing that record labels don't have unlimited power over musicians. It's an example of creative courage, of betting everything on your ability to deliver. And it's a reminder that sometimes the greatest work comes from the hardest circumstances. Tom Petty passed away in 2017, leaving behind one of rock's most consistent catalogs. He never stopped making music, never stopped fighting for what he believed was right, never backed down from challenges. His 40th anniversary tour with the Heartbreakers wrapped up shortly before his death, proving he could still fill arenas 4 decades after that breakthrough. Damn the Torpedoes remains his best-selling album with the Heartbreakers aside from the Greatest Hits compilation. New generations discover it and understand immediately why it mattered. The songs don't sound dated because they weren't chasing trends. They were just trying to be great rock and roll songs. That approach never goes out of style. In the end, Tom Petty's gamble paid off beyond anyone's expectations. He fought the legal battle and won. He made the album he wanted despite impossible circumstances. He stood up to industry pressure and came out stronger. And he created music that has now outlived him, still playing on radios, still meaning something to people who weren't even born when Refugee first burst from speakers in 1979. The Torpedoes were damned, the speed was full ahead, and American rock music would never quite be the same.